How much would a united Ireland cost? Figures from the UK show that Northern Ireland has an annual budget deficit of over £9 billion sterling. However, research for the Oireachtas Joint Committee on the Good Friday Agreement suggests the cost will be a fraction of this figure and that unity could be achieved on an almost cost-neutral basis. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by one of the report's authors, Fianna Fáil Senator Mark Daly. Mark, thank you very much for joining us this evening. What were your findings? What did you find out?
Well, I suppose the research was done by Gunther Thurman, who was a senior economist on the Germany desk for the International Monetary Fund during German reunification, and Mr. Thurman and I looked at the true income and expenditure for Northern Ireland in a reunification scenario. And as you said, it's not the multi-billion euro deficit that the British government states. Gunther's analysis is that in a reunification scenario, it's near a balanced budget. Now,
How near?
Well, I suppose the research stems from a recommendation in a report I did last year for the Good Friday Agreement Implementation Committee on Brexit and the Future of Ireland, Uniting Ireland and its People in Peace and Prosperity. What he looked at was that a number of things that the British include in Northern Ireland's expenditure, and they attribute things such as Northern Ireland's share of British military global spending, nuclear submarines, nuclear missiles, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, UK debt interest payments, UK contribution to the EU, Northern Ireland's share of those, and the British royal family, all attributed to Northern Ireland, which Gunther points out would not be applicable in a unification scenario. He also looked at the issue of pensions, and no Irish government, of course, would be responsible for paying the pensions of former members of the RUC, British Army or the UDR. And Gunther Thurman's analysis is that pension liability was incurred while the North was part of the UK, and therefore that liability would remain with the United Kingdom. That's a figure of about €2.8 billion. There's an accounting adjustment figure done by the UK government, which includes at times Royal Mail pensions and input flows from renewable obligation schemes. I think that could be the Cash for Ash scheme. And then you have the issue of public service, and of course, having dealt with East Germany, where virtually everybody was a civil servant, Gunther states that there would be alignment over time of the public service in the north and the south. So the Republic has a public service of about 8.4% of the population, and currently the north is about 11.4% of the population. So if you add up all those figures between British military global spending, royal family, accounting adjustment, public service and pensions, it comes near a balanced budget. But the difference between income and expenditure is about 700 million.
So 700 million is this estimation versus £9 billion sterling. Are we talking sterling in both instances?
Sterling, yeah.
In both instances. Okay.
And of course, what Gunther points out is the benefits of reunification, because there's a border currently with two different systems, two different currencies. And he said, of course, like there was huge benefit for East Germany. And that analysis has been done already prior to Brexit by a professor from British Columbia University, Kurt Goober, who came before the Good Friday Agreement Committee. And he said after unification there would be a benefit for the whole island economy of €35.6 billion in the first 8 years.
Are there not some optimistic leaps, though, here, Mark, this idea that the United Kingdom would have to continue paying the pensions for members of the British Army, etc.? I mean, in a reunification scenario, I can only imagine there would have to be negotiations between governments on that as to who would pay the bill. And I can't imagine the UK just deciding or agreeing to foot the bill for all of it.
Well, I suppose we have a precedent in that in the divorce payment from the EU, and the civil servants who are British civil servants over in Brussels, their pensions are now going to be paid by the British government. That's part of the divorce settlement. So we have a precedent there. And there are other precedents, but you're right, it will be in negotiations, but we're starting from a point of a man who is probably one of the few economists alive in the world today who has first-hand experience of reunification. And research has shown that 70% of Germans say that reunification has been a success, and 80% say that German reunification would be a template for others, which is why I asked Gunther Thurman to look at the issues of Irish reunification, but specifically in relation to the income and expenditure and what is the true expenditure for Northern Ireland.
It was also extremely expensive, though, wasn't it, German reunification? I think it was something like 1.3 trillion for the first 20 years, and it's still, even now, Western Germany is still transferring billions of euro in subsidies to the eastern parts of the country. Is that the sort of future we face under reunification?
Yeah, I suppose the difference, of course, is that you're going from a situation where you had a communist-controlled economy where there was no capitalist system at all and no private sector. future. And that, of course, is entirely different with Northern Ireland. And as I said already, we've seen a report done prior to Brexit in relation to the benefits of reunification, showing a benefit for the whole island, and that per person breaks down at €2,830 per person over the first 8 years in terms of a benefit. But I suppose the one lesson, and we did touch on the issue of Brexit, is the lesson of Brexit, and this all is about a referendum as provided for under the Good Friday Agreement. The lesson of Brexit is that you don't hold a referendum and then tell everybody what the future looks like. The lesson of Brexit is you have a long discussion and engagement with all sides, plotting out the health service, the education system, the housing and the economy, but the future for the whole island and all its people. And you need to do that well in advance of a referendum and not hold a referendum and then tell everybody what the future would look like.
It is a very sensitive time to be having these discussions, though, isn't it? We know that the Unionists and the DUP are already very antsy about the direction that Brexit might be going and the compromises the British government might make on the Brexit deal. So to be asking them to get into negotiations or talks about what might happen under reunification, is that wise at this time? Well,
I mean, one of the key recommendations of the report is that there would be a new Ireland Form 2, and like its predecessor over 30 years ago, it would look at all the issues. But the unionist community are talking about reunification. Lady Sylvia Herman stood up, and she's a unionist MP for North Down. Her husband was the former Chief Constable of the RUC. She said that there will be a referendum on a United Ireland in her lifetime. Theresa May has said that she doesn't believe the unionists would win a referendum in relation to unification. And I've met senior unionist politicians who said, and some have said it on radio, that they need to negotiate now from a position of strength for their place in United Ireland. But the issue is down here in the south, the lack of planning, the lack of engagement with the unionist community on what the future would look like. And that's the key demographic here. They are concerned, and I have written about it in my report last year, about the issue of land ownership, that they believe that the land will be taken back off them. We need to address that concern clearly. Former members of the security forces believe that there would be a witch hunt and retribution, and we need to make sure that we address those fears, and also the issue of British identity. But it goes back to this issue of policy, and John Bradley, who I quote in the report, talked about economics in Queen's University in 2014, and he said policy neglect seldom goes unpunished, and the Irish government and the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar needs to lead from the front and address the concerns of people on all sides, and needs to put in place the steps and the policies to ensure that the referendum, which many in the unionist community believe will happen, some within 10 years, some believe that it will happen within 10 years, that their concerns need to be addressed, and need to be addressed sooner rather than later.
All right, Fianna Fáil Senator Mark Daly, thank you very much for joining us with that.